Welcome to the Loud and Quiet podcast with me, Stuart Stubbs. I'm in a lot of pain. Last week I was snowboarding. At my age, the pain is real. I've been twice before. Each time I broke my ribs on days 1 and day 2. This time, no broken ribs. I think I might have broken my shoulder. It's not broke, I'm exaggerating, but it hurts like fuck right now. Coccyx took a pounding as well. Having trouble sitting down at the moment. Trying to be brave, trying to push on. Whilst I was going up and down the mountain last week, I put out the first Loud and Quiet podcast. Thank you to everyone that listened to it. It was me talking with Dana from Porridge Radio, and it got a lot of listens. Lots of people listened to it. Thanks to Dana for promoting it on the band's socials. I think that helped. I then had a just an unfortunate situation where I realised I'd made a big spelling mistake on the social post that I made for it. I spelled porridge wrong. Oh, as if I didn't have enough to worry about while snowboarding. And I tell you what, the music that you hear when you're snowboarding, this is very much a first world problem, isn't it? The music you hear is unbelievably bad. It's a lot of Newton Faulkner is an old reference. I'm not expecting anyone to get that. I didn't hear Ed Sheeran, but I heard people that sounded like it was Ed Sheeran, but it was obviously unknown Ed Sheeran's. A lot of Gorillaz. No shade to the Gorillaz, but there was a lot of bad music in the little bars that you can go down to in between falling over. You can crawl into a bar and have a beer. And that's really the best part of the whole thing. Being in a mountain, having a lovely beer. And then they put the music on, and the music, some of it is genuinely the worst music I've ever heard in my life. Anyway, this week's show, is this a show? This week's episode of the Loud and Quiet podcast is an old recording that I wanted to put into this feed because I started the Substack in 2020, and I really just was using it to try to have a private feed for our podcast, for our subscribers to the magazine. And that's why, even though last week's episode was really the first episode of the feed, there's some old stuff on there as well, some old Sweet 16 podcast, which was a series we did just for our subscribers of the physical magazine, where a few of us had conversations with artists about what they remember about being 16 years old, what they were up to, what their hopes and dreams were. And then we would edit our voices out, so it would just be a monologue, about 10 minutes or so of that artist. And this one that I recorded with Amy Taylor from Amyl and the Sniffers around the end of 2021 isn't in this feed at the moment because it's boring, but we were hosting it somewhere else. We were doing all of our subscription content somewhere else. So this one slipped through the net, so I wanted to put it in here, not least because Amyl and the Sniffers have just taken off. I mean, Cartoon Darkness, their album that came out last year, it went top 10 here in the UK. And when you think about the music that Amyl and the Sniffers play, you know, aggressive, backyard, Australian, garage punk rock, that's no mean feat to chart there here in the UK, where it's all about Strictly Come Dancing. So I wanted to put this in here. Love Amy. She came on our other podcast, Midnight Chats, a few years ago, and was probably around the same time. I might have even recorded these two things back to back, and was very, very funny and good value. You can check that out. Just search Midnight Chats on whatever your podcast app of choice is. And one last thing I just want to say before I play this short monologue from Amy. I put this into the chat function here on Substack last week when I put out that Porridge Radio episode. If you are a subscriber, a paid subscriber to the Substack, and you want to work out how do you get the full version on your phone, then the way to do it is to don't go into your app of choice and follow the Midnight Chats podcast there. Just go into any of the posts on Substack and click the icon you want. So if it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever, and that will link them together and it will give you a private feed that will be for the whole thing. The other feed that you can just find on This Is So Boring. The other feed that you can find on those platforms will be previews, and it will be like half of the episode each time, but not the whole episode. Oh my God, that was so dull. Here's Amy Taylor talking about what she remembers from being 16 years old.
Let me think, what year did I turn 16? 2012. My birthday's January 4th, so at the beginning of 2012 I turned 16. I guess, I was in high school. I was living in Mullumbimby, which is where I grew up. That's in northern New South Wales on the east coast, right near the beach. Probably all you London or UK people would know Byron Bay. It's like a small beach town, but it's more inland than so it's not right on the beach. It's like a 15-minute drive to the beach. When I grew up there, it's pretty gentrified now, but when I grew up there, it was more just like heaps of hippies, farmers, and bogans, pretty much. Bogans just like kind of redneck, like just really Australian, like, swears and like has cars and like that kind of stuff. So my mum and dad grew up in Western Sydney, Penrith. They met at the Panthers League Club, which is the football team. Then they moved up to Mullumbimby. They bought that property for really cheap. It was just like farmland that was subdivided. So it was just nothing on there. And they lived in a caravan. So Penrith is bogan. Then they moved up there, which is hippie. They lived on that subdivided farmland and like lived in a caravan for like 4 or 5 years and like planted trees with no electricity. So they were hippies then, I guess. And then built the shed, which we lived in. And then when we were living in the shed, Dad was building the house because he's like a tradie, like a handyman. Yeah, so I don't know which one I fitted into, but maybe even closer to hippie, but not really hippie either. I had 2 jobs, one at this place, which was like a ribbon. It was like a small business with this woman who made kind of like craft and ribbons. So I'd put ribbons onto like little spools and like make up little craft packs. And I also worked at the supermarket, which was IGA. I worked in the deli. My social life was pretty small. I didn't have a lot of friends at that stage. Like a bit of a loner. I had like a boyfriend at the time, and he was kind of like intense, like in hindsight pretty intense. Like he was like homeless and stuff, living out of home, and then like would move back with his parents and then get kicked out constantly, and like visited him at like his like homeless shelter and stuff like that. And he was like my best friend at the time, and because of that I lost like most of my friend group just through like various events. So I was like a bit of a loner, but I also still had like a group of friends who would hang out with sometimes. It was a lot. That was kind of happened over a couple of years, like all that stuff. And I was just a kid, so I was like, this is normal, this is chill.
Okay, that has been a short preview of this episode of the Loud and Quiet podcast. If you'd like to hear the rest of the conversation, then please do head over to loudandquiet.substack.com, where you can subscribe to unlock the rest of this episode and all future episodes of the Loud and Quiet podcast.